We have already discussed the scale of consciousness that you see on the screen in a previous video, and also how you can best climb the scale and get yourself up the scale as high as possible in one life. That's been covered in 2 previous videos, and in this one I'm gonna use a metaphor or analogy to try to simplify and clarify the scale from a different angle, and talk about the macrocosmic significance of the scale, and how it plays out on the world stage, kind of. So basically you have a stream of pure consciousness that is you, your core identity, that is like a river that constantly flows through you. And if nothing was standing in its way, you would be at the top of the scale. You would be at 1000, the highest level possible for a human being at this time. You would be pure consciousness, pure awareness, being aware of itself, because what you do when you go up the scale is that you're freeing up more and more awareness. You can measure this in percentages, as you see in the frequency or below the frequency with percentage integrated. That's how much awareness, more or less, that you have freed up. The higher you climb on the scale, or the lower you go, the less awareness you have free for your own use. So basically you are pure awareness, pure consciousness, which is the same as unconditional love. And this pure awareness or pure consciousness is flowing through you like a river. In that river has been planted an initial stone, a stone which is like a rejection of the river, rejection of the natural self, so to speak. It blocks the natural self, and it creates a projection that you project out onto the world, and that gets reflected back to you in the form of your life and your circumstances and whatnot. But there is not only one stone. The initial stone is what creates the separation, the initial separation from your natural self, so you feel like you are a separate entity, because it closes up your beingness. Because as you have corruption in your beingness, the focus necessarily have to become on that corruption. But when you have so many layers or many stones in the river, that creates a whole hierarchy of corruption. You have to start with the outermost layer, because everybody is basically in a constant healing crisis on this planet. Their whole beingness has been corrupted just by being born into a negative planet with a negative mass consciousness, and people around them, parents and whatnot, who have negativity and resistances and whatnot lodged in their unconscious mind, even if they're positive on the surface, so to speak. So this corrupts your whole beingness, and it divides you into an unconscious and a subconscious and a conscious mind, which is basically a state of healing crisis. And the reason people are not healing is because they are blocking the healing process, because they intuitively understand that if they open Pandora's box, that means they will have to face a lot of uncertainty and chaos and negativity and pain. And they just most people just don't want to do that, so they keep a lid on it their whole life, and thereby they don't really develop much. And when this goes for generation after generation, you have a very stagnated system, which basically is the whole planet. It's a very stagnated, or has been a very stagnated system of where the parents and the surroundings of the new baby being born basically poisons or corrupts every new baby. So this spreads from, or actually accumulates from generation to generation over the times, and it becomes worse and worse in a sense, until you reach a point where you either evolve in one big fell swoop by getting rid of it all, or you self-destruct and start all over again as a species, as a planet. And that has happened many times in the Earth's history. We had these cataclysmic events like Atlantis and whatnot, in which the corruption comes to a head, and it all ends with a big cataclysm of some kind, so the whole thing can start over, and you can basically have a new cycle in which you attempt as a species to graduate to a higher level, like fourth density level of existence. And that's what's going on this planet this time. You have a large part of the population will not make that, and you have a certain percentage who will be shaved off, so to speak, into fourth density, most likely in more than 10 years from now down the road. You will have like an event in which a lot of people will wake up in a more like a dream state, blending of physical and dream state world, in which is fourth density. That's not really the subject of this video, so let's get back to on track here. So the point is that you have this initial separation, initial stone being placed in the river, and that makes you it makes you perceive yourself as separate from your natural self of consciousness and pure awareness, which also makes you sense that you are separate from everything else, from the universe, from the cosmos, and from everybody, every other people, and nature and everything. It makes you feel like a separate entity, an isolated individual, because you have this initial separation, and on top of that initial separation, you have a lot of stones, like layers upon layers, being built upon that initial separation, that initial stone in the river. So it becomes like a hierarchy structure in the river of your consciousness, which is constantly flowing, and it flows through this obstruction, this many-layered hierarchical structure, and that becomes your personality, and it becomes your destiny, as this is projected onto the world, and it becomes your circumstances and everything in your life. So the whole idea is how can you dismantle and get rid of these stones? That's the whole journey. And this compartmentalized hierarchical structure, which is mostly lodged in your unconscious mind, which generates the subconscious portal of emotions and simmering underlying states of being that you might be half conscious or not conscious of, which again generates or attracts certain thought streams, depending on what frequency or what level of consciousness, what level of mind this structure basically creates. Because every structure will have a frequency, a signature frequency, and every structure is obviously unique per person. So, and that you can see on the map here. The structure will take you into the level of mind, which is from 20 to 640, and the levels of consciousness are from 670 to 1000, because that's beyond the mind. That's when you already have integrated and you have been granted basically access to a higher paradigm that's called non-duality and enlightenment. But the game is how can you get rid of this hierarchical structure of the stones in the river, so to speak. And these stones, they create the shadow self, or the negative ego, or the inner Lucifer, as I like to call it. And as you can see, each person has this structure, and this is also the structure of the world. If you look macrocosmically at it, you will see that the world is also run by a hierarchical structure that's mostly hidden from conscious view for most people, right? And this hierarchy is also extremely negative. It consists of extremely negative people who have been ruling the planet, because all the stuff that we repress as collectively in ourselves as a collective species will float to the top to become our rulers, basically. Because we are basically ruled and imprisoned by our own subconscious and unconscious structure. And that's also true on the outside level, but most people don't realize it. You realize it only when you have started to dismantle the inner prison, so to speak. Then you start to realize, hey, this is actually what's going on in this world with the whole conspiracy paradigm and whatnot is actually just a reflection, an outer reflection of our own collective repressed prison hierarchy, compartmentalized system that each person is holding on to in their unconscious mind. And when all billions of people do that, which sort of generates a collective victim mentality, you will attract an outside abuser, a pimp, ruling class, that, so to speak, that abuses and taxes the life force in form of money of the people, and this inner structure of resistances and of the stones in the river also taxes your life force. So that's the same. The inner structure taxes your life force, your vital force, and the outer manifestation taxes your life force via taxing your money. So it's all a reflection of inside as on the inside, as on the outside. It's not really as above, as below. It's more like as on the inside, as on the outside. That's a more correct way of seeing it. So that's quite interesting. If you start to explore that whole thing, you will see it become very obvious. But you have to dismantle at least a certain level of your inner prison to even begin to realize this. And the more you dismantle of the inner prison, the more stones in the river you remove, the more and more obvious it becomes. It becomes super obvious that all the leftists and these, people who are frothing at the mouth, hating Trump and all that, they are locked into, super glued into this victim abuser mentality. So they're basically begging to be abused, like a beaten woman or broken woman who is sort of addicted to her pimp, right? It's the same thing. They're begging for the abusive system. They're fighting tooth and nail against anything that is sort of dismantling this ingrained enslavement system that has been going on for so long, the victim abuser paradigm, which has been going on for all of known history. So all these people who are low level, obviously, they are super glued into that whole system, and they will fight anything that tries to dismantle it, even if it would free them, because it forces them to face that pain and negativity in themselves that they don't want to face, which is what they projected onto Trump. So Trump became like the big evil, for at least half the world, Trump became like an evil Hitler kind of person. And for the other half, he became he was founding father material, basically. So that's the level of divide you're looking at. With those two extremes, you can't really you can't bridge such an extreme gap. Like, one half of the world sees him as a savior and founding father material, and the other half is like going crazy because they believe he is the new Hitler, and they do anything to stop him, right? Anyway, that's something you can explore and you look into on your own also, and it can help actually to go deeper in yourself. But first and foremost, to realize these things, you have to dismantle your own prison. People ask me sometimes, how do I know all this? Where do I get all my knowledge from, and how do I know all these things? Well, it works like this. The more you dismantle the inner prison, the more awareness you free up in yourself, the more pure consciousness you become, the more you automatically start to see things. They become like obvious to you. You can't not see them. It's like the distorted vision you have because of this inner prison, all the stones in the river. They distort your whole perception of reality and of how things work and how things actually are. So when you start to remove them and dismantle this prison to a certain the level and degree, and especially when you reach the higher levels of love and the 500s and whatnot, you start to see the obvious. It starts to become very obvious that you create, or we as a collective create the reality that we have manifested. It happens through us, through the projection of this prison complex. That's why Earth is a prison planet, right? Or has been a hidden kind of stealth prison planet that most people are not aware of. They think they're just living their life. They have no idea that this is a pretty horrible prison planet to be on, because they repress all that in themselves. So they can't see it on the outside in manifestation. So that's why they reject all conspiracy and all information that goes against their limited paradigm, because it threatens to open Pandora's box, and they will have to face things that they don't feel comfortable facing. That's why it's so impossible to convince anybody about conspiracies and basically any paradigm-breaking information about how to cure diseases and whatnot. They will not accept it because it just doesn't compute in their paradigm. It breaks their whole paradigm and worldview apart, and then they will have to face the unknown and open Pandora's box, and they can intuitively sense that's not right for them at that moment, so they block it and they can't see it, and you can't convince them. That's really, in a nutshell, how this whole reality has been for a long time as a prison planet, because of our inner prison being projected out and manifested out and reflected on the outside world. And then you have people on a negative path, on a very low level people who sort of take on the role of being the rulers of that prison on the outside. And they worship Lucifer because the inner Lucifer, the inner negative shadow being, and the collective shadow being, which is created out of all that, because billions of people have this system in them, this artificial shadow being, this structure. So they worship that inner structure in themselves, basically the negative ego, and they try to go down the scale as much as possible, because by doing rituals and negative stuff in rituals and whatnot, they can also merge, or at least become more clearer channels of the negative collective beast, the hierarchy structural beast of the negative collective shadow, basically. Like Charles Manson, for example, he is a perfect example of somebody who's very low on the scale, like level 50, and he can go in and out of channeling the collective negative, seamlessly. Like, it's almost like he's enlightened, but on the dark side of enlightenment. Instead of channeling the pure higher mind or the pure consciousness, he's channeling the collective negativity, the collective negative ego, right? You can see his eyes turn pitch black, and he leans forward and he says these things like, if I started murdering people, there would be none of you left. And I mean, if a normal person says that, it would sound ridiculous, right? Because it just sounds ridiculous. But when he says it, it doesn't sound ridiculous. You're not laughing. You actually, wow, this is some crazy shit, but it's still not laughable, because you can sense that he's not talking as himself. He's talking as the collective negative ego that comes through him, because he's so low level. And that's what serial killers do the same. They can also go, that's what they do when they go on killing sprees. They go very low and they channel the beast, so to speak. And everybody can potentially be such a channel. Even higher level people can sometimes slip and, let the beast come through, so to speak. And schizophrenics, as I've talked about in another video, they have some kind of ability that they can perceive this beast, or the lower level foot soldiers of the beast, which are the negative thoughts or voices that they hear all the time. It's not really their own thoughts, it's entities on the mental or astral level that feed upon these schizophrenics, and basically everybody. So you have like this is manifested on the mental / astral level, this collective beast, and it's a hierarchical, sorry, I have a problem saying that word, it's a hierarchical structure of foot soldiers on the lower levels, and these foot soldiers are the voices that schizophrenics hear, which are consistently negative, always negative, running similar patterns across any patient all over the world, always gaslighting people, trying to make them do negative stuff and isolate them as much as possible, which is probably why this planet has also been isolated. So basically we are all in a collective schizophrenia, kind of, because most people have voices in their head. In the 500s or higher 500s and enlightenment levels, you don't have much of that. Most of the voices are gone. You don't have a constant chatter and narrative in your mind, and you don't have negative thought patterns running all the time, like in the lower levels. This is not really natural, and most people think it is, but silence, having a silent and calm mind, is actually the natural state, or closer to it. And you get that in the high 500s. You get a much calmer mind and very little uncontrollable thought noise, and especially not much negative thought noise. Although you still can get thoughts in those levels, there's not complete silence, but it's much less noisy than the lower levels. So this this negative shadow Lucifer being of the collective is basically encompassing the whole world on the astral mental levels, and it's feeding upon the negativity that we generate in all sorts of actions and emotions and whatnot. And it's always trying to create more food for itself by gaslighting people on the negative path and supporting anyone who, goes down the negative path. If you, for example, somebody does you wrong and you go on a revenge mission, so to speak, you will no longer be supported by a higher mind, but you will be supported by the collective negative ego, which is a sort of artificial machine-like construct, which is why the Matrix is so accurate, because in the Matrix people are being used as food for the machines, and that's exactly what's happening with people in this world. This entity is like a machine-like, insect-like, bacteria-like structure of a hive mind, kind of. And it has the ability to interfere and inject what people think is their own thoughts. But no thoughts are really your own. You're just attracting them according to your level, right? So that's why you shouldn't identify with thoughts, because it can easily fool you onto the negative path and trap you up and whatnot. So the idea is to observe the thought and the mind stuff neutrally and let it go all the time, not be hung up on it too much. So basically you have this collective structure that these elites, negative elite people are worshipping, and they can also channel it depending on how low they have gone on the scale, and through rituals and whatnot they can become like channels of the collective negativity. So all this is all generated by the fact that we have all these stones, or this prison complex in the river of consciousness, or the prison complex that has become our subconscious, unconscious mind. Since everybody has this, because you can't escape having this, getting this, some version of this installed when you're born into a negative planet like this, it's impossible to escape. No matter how good parents you have and well-meaning, you still have negativity from the mass consciousness and other people around you, even if both your parents are at 1,000, which is most likely not the case. You will still absorb negativity that will corrupt your beingness, no matter what, when you are born into such a negative environment. That's just how it works. So that's how it plays out on the macro scale, basically. And what's happening these days, and has been going on for a while, is the whole Ascension process, in which a lot of people who are specialists in this dismantling process, who have done it many times before, they volunteered to come here to balance out this system, because it's been severely imbalanced, and it was going to become a very bad situation if people hadn't volunteered, or souls hadn't volunteered to come here to help. It would have set back the evolution of the whole, basically the whole galaxy or universe a long time, or it could create a big mess, because all these souls many of these souls would not be able to graduate or go through another massive cycle of suffering for no reason, because they already learned all the lessons except how to get back to higher levels again. So you have all these volunteers who came here who don't really need to be here, but they volunteered. They basically higher level souls who incarnated into this system, and their mission was to take on a lot of negativity in their unconscious mind, and then dismantle it and wake up and get up the scale as quickly and as high as possible, and then basically help other people do the same, and also, even more importantly, balance out the mass consciousness negativity. So that's what, many people will not at this point necessarily be teaching anybody, but just by being alive you are doing a good enough job, because you have done the inner work to a large enough degree that you actually are contributing to balancing out maybe hundreds of thousands of people, even millions of people, because awareness or light is much stronger than darkness or negativity. So that's why you don't need that many people to reach a certain high level on the scale to actually balance out a lot of other people who have no chance of doing that, because they're too deep in negativity. So all those people, or most of the people who volunteered, and hopefully a lot of other people too who managed to get themselves up to a certain level, mid 300s is sort of the watershed level, kind of 330 on the scale. If you're above that, you will be part of the ascension process. You will be shaved off into fourth density. So we're basically sailing through at a crucial juncture of evolution for this whole planet. And then the volunteers who succeeded, and everybody else who also get to those levels, the higher mid 300s and whatnot, above that, they will be eventually be shaved off into fourth density, which will be like a dream state, mix of blending of dream reality and physical reality, which Bashar has said will most likely happen in the beginning of 2030, like 2033 or something like that is the latest forecast for when some kind of event will make all those people fall asleep, basically, and they will wake up in like a new dream version of themselves. And they will, and that dream will feel like very much like a dream in the beginning, he says, but then eventually it will be sort of crystallize and become more physical, but it will still be much less dense and physical than the current reality. And that's the reality where we will actually have first contact for real, like meet aliens face to face, meet ETs and the ET family and the galactic family face to face, so to speak. That will happen only after we have gotten into this fourth density dream, merging of dream and physical, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to handle the ETs much higher levels and higher energies. So that's what we have to look forward to, and that's going to happen in the next 10 years if it goes according to plan. At least that's the latest number or forecast that he has given. He has given it many times, actually. Around 2033 is the target year for the exit and entry into a completely new way of existing, basically. So what we are seeing now is that the whole agenda of the dark side of enslaving and depopulation agenda and whatnot is not really succeeding as a plan. I mean, it's succeeding halfway, but not as much and as severe as it would have been if it wasn't for the volunteers who came and lifted the mass consciousness up to a much higher level. The mass consciousness is still in the higher 400s last time I checked. So what we're waiting for is a breakthrough into the 500s for the mass consciousness, which will be a big deal. And things will probably start to accelerate a lot when we can get to that point. And I think that may now be happening at the same time as we have this mass contact event that Bashar talked about in his latest session, which is going to be 2026, 27, he said, in which there will be a mass contact event that everybody will be aware of, and that will change everything, he says. And I believe that event will be enough to push, maybe together with a lot of people actually becoming enlightened who have been waiting a long time for it in the higher levels and the higher 500s. They will get enlightened at the same time as you have this mass contact event, as far as I can guess. And by all that together, it will create a shockwave kind of in the mass consciousness, will blast away a lot of negativity. And then that will raise the mass consciousness probably up to the 540s, like unconditional love. Because Bashar has hinted to that there will be waves of unconditional love going around the whole planet and changing, and then everything will accelerate and change a lot quicker. And you will have like a decade of a renaissance in which everybody, or at least most people, work together to completely change the world, and technology will be granted from the ETs, and they will assist us in a much more direct way, all the way up to the transition into fourth density, which happens around 10 years from now if it goes according to plan. At least that's the current how I see it currently is playing out. So I hope that wasn't too chaotic and all over the place. It's hard to tell sometimes when you make these videos, but until next time, I will see you again.